Have you ever been judged by the size of your wallet before they even bothered to ask about your mind? It was Thanksgiving. The table gleamed with gold-rimmed plates, vintage wine, and the quiet tension only wealth can afford to ignore. Her family was all there, bankers, lawyers, legacy names polished over generations. And me? The scholarship kid from Bogota with a perfect GPA second-hand shoes and a startup no one took seriously. I was reaching for the Cabernet when I heard her father say it. She's always had a soft spot for pretty boys with no backbone. In 6 months, he'll be begging her for rent money. Laughter, soft, refined, cruel. I paused bottle in hand and let the sting settle into my chest like cold iron. I didn't say a word, didn't break the surface of his self-assured voice, just kept pouring smiling quiet. Because what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that 3 days later, my crypto venture fund would close a deal valuing us at $500 million. And suddenly, I understood some revenge doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be timed. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe. I promise you'll want to hear what comes next. My name is Mateo Ruiz, and I was never supposed to sit at a table like that. I was born in a one-bedroom apartment in the outskirts of Bogota, where the air smelled of motor oil, not mahogany, and imported perfume. My mother was a school teacher who taught 3 shifts a day. My father left before I could remember his voice. But I had 2 things that no one could take from me, a sharp mind and a quiet determination. From a young age, I was drawn to numbers not just for the logic, but for the freedom they offered. Equations made sense when nothing else did. While my classmates were trying to sneak into clubs, I was in internet cafes reading white papers on blockchain and decentralized systems. At 15, I was tutoring college students twice my age. By 17, I'd won a full ride to MIT, a miracle, wrapped in an acceptance letter. I arrived in Boston with 1 suitcase, no coat, and the kind of hunger that doesn't come from skipping meals, but from knowing you have no second chances. I worked as a dishwasher, coded at night, and slept 4 hours a day. I never went to parties. I didn't have time for small talk. But I graduated top of my class in applied mathematics and computer science with a thesis that would later become the foundation of my fund's algorithmic decision engine. And that's when I met Isabella Vega. She was nothing like the girls I had known. Her father was a legend in Latin American finance. Her last name opened doors. But she didn't walk through them with arrogance. She walked through them like someone who had been expected to be impressive since birth and secretly longed to just be free. We met at a blockchain panel. I was presenting. She was bored. Afterward, she came up and said, "You talk like code is poetry." We spent 3 hours debating decentralization, human psychology, and whether economic freedom could be engineered. She laughed at my seriousness. I couldn't stop watching the way her mind moved. We started seeing each other. Coffee shops, late-night study sessions, quiet walks through snow-covered campus streets. But the closer we got, the louder the outside voices became, especially hers. Not hers exactly, but her father's. Don Alejandro Vega, multi-billionaire real estate mogul, former Minister of Commerce, owner of 12 homes, and perhaps more importantly, the man who looked at me like I was something scraped off the bottom of his driver's shoe. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His silence said more than insults ever could. To him, I wasn't a man building something. I was a distraction, a detour, a temporary phase in his daughter's otherwise perfect trajectory. And no matter how many hours I worked, how many lines of code I wrote, how many articles I published, none of it meant anything in the face of old money. But I wasn't here to prove anything to him, not yet. After graduation, Isabella and I moved to Miami. It was her world, sun-soaked high-rises, weekend brunches with hedge fund managers and a condo that overlooked the bay. I brought 2 laptops, a dream, and the kind of work ethic you earn when life has never handed you anything. While she began her work with an education nonprofit, I set up shop in a corner of the apartment, my office, where I built and rebuilt the same crypto analytics platform over and over until it started breathing on its own. My goal wasn't flashy. I wanted to help early-stage blockchain projects analyze market behavior and survive in a space where most of them died within months. I wasn't chasing coins, I was chasing infrastructure. We lived simply. I cooked arroz con pollo while she graded lesson plans. We laughed at the absurdity of our situation, a man from the barrio working on crypto economics in a luxury building where the valet never looked me in the eye. But it worked. We had love code and coffee. That was enough. Except for her father. Every time we visited him, I felt like I was being weighed in a balance I could never tip. Don Alejandro Vega wasn't cruel. He was worse. He was measured, always watching, never impressed. Every comment from him was wrapped in silk, but sharpened like a knife. "Still working on your crypto hobby?" he asked once, swirling a glass of scotch on a Sunday afternoon. "Have you thought about applying for a proper job at J.P. Morgan? They're hiring quant analysts." Isabella would grip my hand under the table gently, as if reminding me not to react. I never did. I just nodded, smiled, and poured more wine. But the whispers kept growing louder. At one dinner party, one of his colleagues asked me if I was still doing internet stuff. Another suggested I apply for a teaching assistant position at FIU. They weren't trying to offend me, they were trying to rescue me. In their eyes, I wasn't a threat. I was a cautionary tale still being written. What hurt the most was watching Isabella start to absorb their doubts. She never said it out loud, but sometimes when the bills piled up and my stress bled into the room like secondhand smoke, I saw it flicker behind her eyes. Fear. Not of me, but of how long she could carry the weight of my ambition in a world that didn't believe in it. I never blamed her. She had grown up surrounded by men who measured worth in quarterly earnings and surnames. What we had went deeper than any of that, but even deep love can drown in the shallow judgment of the world. I spent most days alone, building, pitching, failing. The startup world was ruthless. I landed a few small contracts enough to keep the lights on. But the big VCs wouldn't return my emails. Crypto was still considered a joke in most elite investment circles, especially when it came from a man with no last name legacy. Still, I pushed forward. Every insult was fuel. Every silence from her father was a reminder. I wasn't looking to be accepted. I was building something that didn't need his permission. But I would be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Being in love with someone who sees you, while surrounded by people who refuse to. And yet I stayed, not to prove him wrong, but to prove to myself that I wouldn't quit, that even inside the lion's den I could remain silent, stay focused, and wait for my moment to roar. But building in silence has a price. My first real startup and analytics platform tailored to DeFi projects launched quietly, backed by 2 angel investors I met through a blockchain webinar. I called it CryptoLoom. The idea was solid, even necessary help. Small crypto teams interpret user behavior and avoid collapse by giving them real-time market intelligence. For 6 months, it seemed to work. We onboarded 5 clients, published case studies, and I even got invited to speak at a regional fintech event. But then the market turned. Bitcoin plummeted. Ethereum followed. Valuations were slashed overnight, and investor money dried up like a faucet someone forgot to warn you they were turning off. 3 of my clients shut down. 1 disappeared without paying their final invoice. The 5th sent a polite email thanking us for the great effort right before pulling out entirely. And just like that, I was alone again. CryptoLoom collapsed under its own weight. I had borrowed against what little savings Isabella and I had. The server bills were relentless. I let go of my only contractor, moved my office from our apartment to the back seat of my aging Toyota parked in a grocery store lot where the Wi-Fi still reached at night. I remember sitting there one evening, hands freezing on the keyboard, watching lines of error code blur in my vision. Isabella was at home grading student essays, thinking I was with a client. The truth was, I was trying to sell second-hand GPUs to pay our rent. I hated lying. But I hated being seen as a failure even more. And yet, she found out. Of course she did. I came home one night to find groceries already stocked, bills paid, and Isabella sitting at the kitchen table, silent. Her eyes didn't accuse me. They mourned for me. "I covered this month," she said softly. "It's okay." I didn't answer. I just stared at the floor, humiliated, not because I needed help, but because I had forced the woman I loved to carry me through a storm I'd promised her we could weather together. The next morning, Don Alejandro showed up, unannounced in a crisp blue suit, holding a copy of Forbes Latin America under his arm. He didn't say hello. "Come have lunch with me," he said to Isabella. Then turning to me, "Mateo, you're welcome too, unless you have internet coins to manage." It wasn't just a jab, it was a reminder I was losing, publicly, and he was keeping score. That night I stared at the ceiling and thought seriously about quitting, taking the advice everyone had always given me. Go work at an established firm, get a salary, buy respect with benefits and stability. Play the game. But something in me refused. I remembered what blockchain meant to me when I first discovered it. Not just a technology, a philosophy, a way to give people freedom from the same gatekeepers who now laughed at me across champagne tables. I didn't want a job. I wanted a system where someone like me, no connections, no legacy, no name, could thrive. That night, I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed 3 words, Origin Capital Fund. Then a subtitle, a decentralized venture firm for Latin American founders, building the future no one else believes in. No more platforms, no more chasing clients who didn't see the vision. Instead, I would build a fund that backed people like me, creators from the margins, dreamers with no godfathers, developers coding by candlelight. It was a ridiculous idea. I had no capital, no partners, no reputation, but I had a mission. And sometimes that's the only asset worth anything when you're starting from zero. The first investor who replied to my pitch for Origin Capital didn't ask about profit margins or risk mitigation. He asked one question, "Why you?" I told him the truth. Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated. Because I've built something from nothing before, and I've watched it burn. Because I've lived on both sides of the equation, the one who pitches and the one no one listens to. And because I believe Latin America isn't short on talent, it's short on people willing to bet on that talent. He didn't respond right away. But 3 days later, I woke up to a wire transfer for $500,000. No name, just the words, "for Origin." Don't waste it. I never found out who he was. Not then, not until much later. But that anonymous angel became the seed that grew everything. I worked like a man possessed, built pitch decks by day, took meetings with skeptical founders by night. I used every connection I had, former professors, friends from MIT, even Discord forums, scouting for devs with real code and real pain. Not moon boys chasing Lambos. Builders with vision and dirt under their nails. I made my first 3 investments in Bolivia, Mexico, and Argentina. Tiny teams. No reputations. But their ideas were beautiful decentralized identity for undocumented workers. Cross-border remittances using stablecoins. Agricultural supply chain transparency for rural farmers. The bets were small 20K, 30K, sometimes just 10K in USDT. But I knew what those dollars meant in cities where rent was $200 and code was written in cafes on borrowed laptops. And then something shifted. One of our Bolivian projects, an open-source smart contract auditing tool, went viral after a crypto security breach hit global headlines. They had predicted the exploit pattern 2 months prior. Suddenly, developers everywhere were using their tool. They got acquired for $2.5 million in equity, and I walked away with a 7x return on a $25K investment. That changed everything. Word spread. Startups started coming to me. I began getting inboxes from Brazilian founders, Colombian AI groups, even Peruvian collectives working on rural DeFi cooperatives. By month 9, Origin Capital was managing $5.2 million, but I kept my mouth shut. No LinkedIn announcements, no podcasts, no press. Alejandro still thought I was unemployed. Even Isabella didn't know the full scope. She knew I was working hard. She knew I wasn't borrowing anymore. but she didn't know about the new term sheets, the silent syndicates forming, or the second round of LPs I was assembling from crypto whales in Singapore and Spain. Because this time, I wasn't just building a fund, I was building a fortress. By the start of the next year, Origin had backed 28 companies. 10 were profitable, 4 had been acquired, and our retention rate was almost unheard of. I was already in early conversations with a fintech group in the U.S. about a minority stake acquisition one that would value us at $500 million. But the most surprising twist hadn't happened yet. It came in the form of a handwritten letter from Isabella's grandfather tucked inside an envelope delivered to our door. He had always been quiet, a man of few words and fewer opinions, but the note was short, and I will never forget it. Matteo, I once lost everything in a revolution because I bet on men who wore suits instead of ideas. I saw something different in you. I was your first investor. It's time they all knew why. He had been the anonymous wire. Isabella wept when I told her, not just from pride, but because it meant someone in her family had seen me before the spotlight. And me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing legitimacy. I was it. And the man who once mocked me for internet coins had no idea what storm was coming. Only 3 days remained before the press release went live, and I wasn't planning on telling him a word until he saw my name on every screen money could buy. The second Thanksgiving felt eerily similar to the first. Same polished silverware, same imported wines, same air-conditioned dining room cooled to perfection. But everything had changed. Except him. Don Alejandro greeted me with the same patronizing handshake, his smile practiced, his gaze dismissive. He was wearing a tailored linen suit, freshly back from a real estate diplomacy retreat in the Cayman Islands. Isabella and I had arrived early, hoping for a quieter start. But within 15 minutes, the room was filled with extended family cousins in designer dresses, uncles in golf blazers, people who had never built a damn thing but knew exactly how to critique those who tried. I kept my tie straight, my tone warm, my answers vague. "How's the project going?" someone asked. "Still working on early-stage funding," I replied with a smile. "Must be tough with the markets the way they are," another added. Alejandro sipped his drink and gave me that familiar half-nod. "You know, Matteo, sometimes the smartest decision a man can make is to recognize when a dream is just a delay of reality." I didn't flinch. Just like last year, I let it sit. Let the silence wrap around his words like velvet. But this time, it wasn't cold iron settling in my chest. It was something steadier. Solid. A slow-burning fire that didn't need to explode to be felt. Because I knew what he didn't. 3 days from now, a press release would hit every major business news outlet in the hemisphere. Fintech Titan acquires 12% of Origin Capital in deal valuing fund at $500 million. The ink was dry. The equity was signed. The onboarding had already begun. I had done it. Not just for myself, but for every coder sleeping in rented rooms, every founder who'd been laughed out of boardrooms for having an accent, every smart kid told that their worth ended at their wallet. And still, I said nothing. Isabella caught my eye across the table, the corners of her mouth softening. She could sense something, but she didn't know the details. I had told her we were growing, yes, that Origin had secured new partnerships, but not this. Not the valuation, not the number, not yet. She was pregnant. We had found out 2 weeks earlier. She wanted to wait until Christmas to tell her family. I respected that. And yet, as her father sat there explaining why some men aren't meant to lead, I realized this might be the last time he ever looked at me as if he still understood the rules of the world better than I did. The last time he'd speak freely from the top of the mountain, unaware that the earth beneath him had already shifted. After dinner, he clapped me on the back like a man who thinks he's being generous. "Keep at it, Matteo," he said. "The best builders fail a few times before they become good employees." I nodded. "Thanks, Don Alejandro. I'm learning more every day." And I was, but not the kind of lesson he imagined. 3 days. That's all I needed. because some storms don't announce themselves with thunder. They just arrive. Quiet, exact, and unstoppable. Monday arrived without ceremony. The sky over Miami was soft and gray, the kind of weather that makes people stay inside and scroll. Perfect. At exactly 9:00 a.m. Eastern, the press release went live. U.S. fintech titan acquires minority stake in Origin Capital, valuing the fund at $500 million. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Bloomberg, TechCrunch, Forbes, LATAM. My name, Mateo Ruiz, was in headlines next to words like visionary disruptor architect of Latin America's blockchain frontier. I didn't need to refresh my inbox. The notifications poured in like a dam breaking by 19 missed calls, 48 emails, 112 new LinkedIn requests. A message from an old MIT professor I hadn't spoken to in years. I always told them, you weren't just smart, you were inevitable. Crypto Twitter erupted. My DMs were full of investors, journalists, founders wanting to know what Origin would do next. But I ignored most of it, because there was only one reaction I was waiting for. At 9:23 a.m., Isabella's sister, Lucia, sent her a text. Did you know about this? Dad just dropped his espresso cup. Alejandro had found out. Not from me, not through whispers, but from Bloomberg like every other skeptic who'd written me off. By noon, Isabella's phone was buzzing nonstop. Her mother left a breathless voicemail, something about pride and what a blessing, and your grandfather would be so proud. Lucia called 3 times, asking how we'd kept this a secret. But Alejandro, nothing. No call, no text, not even a polite LinkedIn thumbs up. And that silence. It roared, because I knew what it meant. This wasn't just surprise, it was reckoning. He hadn't seen it coming. All his carefully crafted assumptions, the rules he thought still applied, the invisible script he followed, where pedigree outranked potential had collapsed in less than 280 characters. Around 3:00 p.m., a Miami business reporter I knew personally reached out. We're doing a profile piece. Can I quote you? I gave her one line. I never built Origin to prove anyone wrong. I built it because the right people were never given a chance to be right. By 5:00 p.m., the article was viral, and still Alejandro said nothing. That evening, Isabella and I sat on the balcony, her hand resting over the small curve of her belly. I haven't heard from him, she said. You will? I replied, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. He's not the type to stay silent forever, just long enough to figure out how to rewrite the last 3 years of his own story. She smiled, but I could feel her conflict. Pride, yes, but also tension, because no matter how cold Alejandro could be, he was still her father. Do you think he's angry? No, I said. He's not angry. He's afraid. Of what? Of a world he no longer controls, because in this new world, merit doesn't need permission, and the people he once dismissed as background noise are now holding the mic. By Tuesday morning, the silence had become its own kind of statement. No call, no message, no knock on the door. And that told me more than words ever could. Alejandro had seen the news, digested the headlines, calculated the implications, and was now trying to rewrite the memory of every word he'd said to me in the last 3 years. By Wednesday evening, the first attempt came through. A text. Simple. Almost sterile. Mateo, I've been trying to reach you. Can we talk when you have a moment? I read it. Didn't reply. Isabella noticed. She didn't say anything, but her glance lingered on the screen. She didn't need to ask, she already knew. He's probably just embarrassed, she said. Good, I replied. He should be. That night he called twice. I let both go to voicemail. On Thursday, he tried again. Then again. And finally, Friday morning, the knock came. It was 10:30 a.m. I was on a video call with a blockchain team from Sao Paulo when Isabella opened the door. Her voice floated into the room, hesitant. It's my dad. He says he wants to talk, with both of us. I paused, looked at her, and nodded. We sat across from him in the living room. He didn't wear his usual suit, just a button-down, slightly wrinkled, and a look I hadn't seen before, something caught between exhaustion and humility. He didn't start with pleasantries, didn't even make eye contact at first. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "Matteo, I've been trying to reach you since Monday. I saw the announcement. I saw what you built. And I realized I've been wrong, deeply wrong about you. I stayed quiet," he continued. "When Isabella brought you home, I saw a man who reminded me of the life I tried to leave behind. Not because of who you were, but because of who I used to be, before the money, before the title. I judged you unfairly. I confused fear with wisdom. Still, I said nothing." Alejandro looked up, finally meeting my gaze. "I said things about you that weren't just disrespectful. They were cruel. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I didn't want to believe you could succeed without following my path. That was pride, and fear, and ignorance." I studied him. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but structurally, like something inside him had collapsed. "You didn't just disrespect me," I finally said. "You disrespected her. You doubted her judgment. You made her carry your expectations in silence." He turned to Isabella. "I know. And I regret that more than anything." There was a long pause, the kind where no one wants to speak first. Then I asked him the question that had been pressing in my chest for years. "What do you actually want from me now?" He exhaled slowly. "I want the chance to know the man my daughter saw long before I did. I want to understand what you've built, not because it made headlines, but because it clearly matters. I want to learn, if you'll let me." It was a good answer. Honest, not rehearsed. But I didn't give him a clean exit. "I don't need your validation." "Don Alejandro," I said, "I never did. But if we're going to move forward, it has to start with one thing: respect. Not just for me, but for your daughter's ability to choose her path, and for the idea that success doesn't always look the way you were taught." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I was wrong, not just about your company, but about who you are." Isabella finally spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. "We're going to have a child, and I want that child to grow up in a family that doesn't confuse love with control." Alejandro's face cracked then, just a little. The years, the mistakes, the walls he'd built, all visible. "I'll earn that chance," he said, "one step at a time." And for the first time in 3 years, I believed him. Not because he asked for forgiveness, but because he finally stopped pretending he had nothing to learn. Over the following months, something unexpected happened. Alejandro didn't try to rewrite history. He didn't send lavish gifts or force shallow reconciliations. Instead, he called occasionally, sometimes to ask questions about the blockchain space, sometimes just to check in. The tone had changed. It wasn't prideful or strategic. It was careful, humble, intentional. And I responded, but only when I wanted to. Not to punish him, but because for once I was no longer the one seeking approval. I was busy, transitioning Origin through a new round of funding, mentoring founders in Lima and Medellin, planning a future for our growing family. The real test came at Christmas. Alejandro invited the entire family to his estate again. We accepted not out of obligation, but because pretending he didn't exist would only give him more power than he deserved. The evening surprised me. When his neighbors stopped by with gifts, he introduced me without hesitation. "This is my son-in-law, Matteo Ruiz, founder of Origin Capital. A sharp mind, built something incredible. No hesitation, no performative humility. Just facts spoken with earned pride." After dinner, we ended up in the kitchen, just the two of us. He handed me a beer, paused, then said, "You could have humiliated me. You didn't. That speaks louder than the headlines." I didn't reply right away, just looked at him and said, "I considered it." He laughed soft and tired. "I'm sure you did." Weeks later, my promotion was published in the Austin Business Journal, Director of Small Business Blockchain Strategy at Origin's new U.S. division. It came with new equity and a much larger platform. The congratulatory calls flooded in, but only one stood out. "Alejandro?" His voice was clear, Measured, I've been telling everyone, my neighbors, my investors, even my accountant, I'm proud of what you've built. It was honest, but more importantly, it was no longer about redemption, it was about recognition. We eventually bought a house in central Austin, modest, warm, filled with light and new beginnings. I set up a real office. Isabella decorated the nursery. Alejandro visited once a month, asked thoughtful questions, and never again spoke to me like I was disposable. I had stopped needing him to see me, and because of that, he finally did. Let him doubt you in the beginning, I once told myself. Just make sure he can't deny you in the end. That's what real revenge looks like. Comment if you've ever stayed silent just long enough for the truth to speak for you. There's a quiet kind of revenge that doesn't come with shouting courtroom drama or slammed doors, it comes with evolution. Mateo's story isn't just about business success or proving someone wrong. It's about reclaiming your own value in a world that often measures worth by legacy instead of vision. What we witnessed was more than personal vindication, it was a shift in power. A man born outside the system built his own, without shortcuts, without approval. And by doing so, he forced those who dismissed him to face something more terrifying than failure, being wrong about someone who never fought back with ego, only with results. This is the kind of masculinity and leadership we need more of today. Calm, focused, emotionally intelligent, and impossible to ignore. If you've ever felt underestimated, remember silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just the sound of strategy unfolding. Let us know in the comments with a simple phrase like, "I've felt that silence too." Your voice might give someone else the strength to keep building. And if this story spoke to you, subscribe, like, or share it with someone who needs to be reminded that revenge doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be undeniable.